at the end of the session. Tonight we have Sarah Fard joining us. Sarah Fard is a high school music teacher with Medford Public Schools, an educational consultant for the Berkeley Institute for Accessible Arts Education, and a faculty member at Longy School of Music. Much of her work with educators focuses on adaptive music education methods for students with disabilities, guitar education, and popular music education. Sarah's workshop will last about 25 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. If you have questions about her work or questions about programs here at Longy, feel free to put them in the chat during the session. I'll be monitoring that, and we can address them at the end. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to Sarah.
Hi, thank you, Jamie, and welcome everyone. I'm joining tonight from Watertown, Massachusetts. It's so cool to see people from all over Grafton. One of my best friends is from Grafton. Hi, Jody. We are indeed talking about music literacy. So I'm going to share my screen here. Here we go. We don't want that there. There we go. We want that. But I'm also going to link these slides in the chat because there are some links that I hope will be helpful to you, as well as some tutorials if you want to go back and explore some things. This is a quick PD, and I don't know about you, but after teaching all day, sometimes my brain is fried, and it's nice to have something to look at. So before we really delve into things, I want to give a moment for some people to add ideas in the chat about what skills are required. What skills do you use when you're reading standard notation? Because we're going to really be delving into our standard Western staff notation and how we can create access points in our visuals for students who might find that form of music literacy a little bit of a barrier. So what skills are required to read staff notation? Give me some ideas in the chat. What do you need to be able to do? You're also welcome to unmute and chime in if that works best for you. Yep, add.
Think alphabetically.
Yep. Not just think alphabetically, but think about the musical alphabet, right? After G, we're going to A, to C, perceive visually for sure, typically. Left to right, up and down, absolutely. Visual placement, up and down, that's a huge one. Pulse accounting, for sure, for sure. Yeah, reading rhythm and pitch in one symbol, processing all those things. Think about when I see treble clef and a note on the second line of the treble clef. Now I'm a guitar player, that's my main instrument. So I'm looking at it and I'm perceiving, I can see those images. I can differentiate usually all these black images against what's usually a white background, and I can differentiate those lines from the clef, from the time signature, from the note. I can tell, okay, that's a treble clef. That means these lines and these spaces are these particular letters. And okay, that note on the second line is this shape, so that means it's this many beats. And okay, now I know that it's a G and maybe it's 4 beats. And okay, what does that mean on my guitar? Well, I have a few options on the guitar of where I could play that. It's a lot of processes that I'm going through when I see that note. So today, I'm going to put this in. I'm going to keep going back and forth between having it in slideshow mode and not. I apologize. Sometimes I like to have it in that mode and sometimes I don't. So today we're going to review the barriers of standard music notation as they relate to disability. Very briefly, we just talked about some of those processes we go through, and we're going to mainly be working with how can we adapt our visuals to accommodate for those barriers that some of our students with disabilities might face. I teach at the high school level. It's not uncommon for me to have students enter my class. Some of them sign up to be there, some of them don't. And they tell me that they stopped participating in music class when they were younger because they couldn't read the notation. So our job as music educators, we want to get kids playing, we want to get them excited about music. Sure, we want them to have some form of music literacy, but there are things that we can do to open that access point for them. So now I'm teaching in Massachusetts. Some of you are teaching in different states or different countries. This is the list of disabilities that are recognized by the state of Massachusetts Department of Education. They are likely very similar to the disabilities that you might see on the IEPs in your school. Now in Canada, I apologize, I cannot remember exactly, but I'm fairly certain, and you can tell me, do you call them IEPs? I know you have some form of documentation for your students who are receiving special education services. Okay, that's what I thought. So usually you have a primary disability. You might see a student with a secondary disability, but that's generally the disability that is impacting the student's education, their access to their education. They might have other disabilities that aren't listed there if that's not considered the biggest barrier to their education. So many of you know it's really rare to see in an IEP something specific to music class. We have to infer a lot. We have to infer how these disabilities might impact how a student is able to read music. We can't make a blanket statement about, okay, well, every student who's autistic is going to experience XYZ. We know every student is different. I find it is helpful to think more in terms of what are the possible support needs? These are things we tend to see a lot in the section of the IEP that talks about accommodation. So regardless of whether it's because of ADHD or autism spectrum disorder, you might have a student with executive dysfunction. So they might have difficulty with impulse control, working memory, decoding symbols, organizational skills. If I'm looking at that list, there are some things that really stand out to me when it comes to reading music notation. I wonder if they stand out to anybody else. If I'm looking at executive dysfunction, any of those things stand out to you for reading music?
Decoding symbols for sure.
Oh, for sure. Decoding symbols and working memory too, right? It's been an experience of mine that I'll have some students where every time I go over reading notation with them, it's almost like, I say it's like Groundhog's Day. Like, I thought I did this already. We're doing it again. It just, every time I have to review with them. So they're having difficulty remembering what they learned. And it might be because of their disability. Vision impairment, somebody mentioned already. Just seeing the notation. Sometimes it's very small, sometimes it's all black and white. If you have a student who has a vision impairment that makes it difficult for them to see certain colors or differentiate foreground from background, they might have difficulty accessing that in there. Slow processing speed. You might have a student who does understand how to read it, but maybe in the ensemble, they're taking longer to access that information because of their processing speed. It's mentioned a few times in the chat, text. You might see tracking text in an IEP for example, like reading language support needs. But we know then that might translate also to tracking notes in music, tracking the up and down and left and right of the notes. If we're working with auditory information too, there are some studies that, and I've experienced it in my classroom, that indicate that people with specific learning disabilities, executive dysfunction, which could be autism, ADHD, also specific learning disability, they might not perceive beat and rhythm the same as the not neurotypical person might. So it might be important for us to have a visual that really supports the student's understanding of how long the note lasts, the duration of the note, so it's more concrete and straightforward. Sequencing work, finding patterns, all these things are going to come up in those accommodations lists. So we need to think about how we can support that with our visuals. First thing I always think about, oops, I'm going to do that, is color coding. You might have already used this in your work. Color coding can be a great support for students if it has meaning. I want to put an aside to that sometimes color coding can be helpful, and not so much, I guess, color coding, but changing the colors of your visual for students. If it is, okay, now the lines on the staff are red and the notes are still black, or vice versa, that might help someone with a vision impairment. You might have a student with a vision impairment where it says very specifically, the student has to have all their text in red. Then it's important that the music also follows that, right? But if you're color coding to help a student with reading the notation and understanding what to play, it's really great if that color coding has meaning with the instrument. In this case, correlating with the finger placement. It's pitch specific, kind of like bullwhackers, right? These colors correlate with the pitch on the piano, and you can color code that. I do this in my classes. I teach, I should have mentioned what I teach. I teach guitar, I teach music technology, I teach popular music ensemble. I used to teach percussion. And I also teach adapted music, which is a sub-separate class for students with high support needs. And I use dry erase markers. I also use vinyl, so I can cut it out and stick it on my MIDI keyboards. Both work pretty well. They're removable. They don't leave a big mess, but they're semi-permanent if you don't want to keep redoing it for every class. So if I'm color coding to correlate with my pitch, what barriers could I eliminate by doing that? I color code my notes to match the colors on the instrument for finger placement. I see an idea in the chat. Decoding, for sure. Now I see, okay, it's a orange C, and the C on the piano is orange. I don't have to process as much and decode as much of what that symbol's telling me to do, right? It helps the notes stand out against everything else. It does definitely working memory, Rebecca's mentioning. And I do find that a lot of the things we do to support with decoding are also eliminating a lot of working memory needs. So it's supporting both of those things because they're very much connected. To help with the fine motor skill impairment, although it does make it very direct as to where the student needs to play on the instrument, close together absolutely can help with that too. That's great. I didn't even include that in here. That's a great point. It doesn't help so much right now if I'm just color coding my pitch for tracking notes up and down. However, I keep doing that. If I color code octaves, it's not uncommon. I find that some students, they really have a difficult time tracking the up and down. When I start students on something like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, I hear a lot of dun, 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 dun. And if I find that I have to keep reviewing that with a student and they're still kind of lost, something I feel like I hear a lot is like, well, wait, I don't get it. Wait, I don't get it. Then maybe I can separate the octaves by color, and suddenly it becomes a lot less confusing for those students. Right now I have freshman classes. I see them for 4 days and then they're gone. It's really not enough time to get to know each student's learning styles and needs, but it's part of an exploratory rotation. They want them to see all their options at the school. And I had a student yesterday who really, the octaves was really causing a challenge for him. So I separated the octaves by color and he instantly got it. And he even said like, oh, now I get it. And I could tell he was getting really frustrated beforehand. So I'm so glad that I pivoted. I almost wish I'd pivoted sooner. And you can see here that the student has some sort of adaptive notation where there's color coding. The notes are still moving up and down, but they don't have to read the rhythm symbols except for the rests right now. Again, I use these dry erase markers. They come off pretty well. Some of the colors, like the red one, if you can avoid it, maybe, unless you have a Mr. Clean Magic eraser. But another thing I like about using the dry erase markers is that once a student gets used to the keys, they can label for themselves if they're able, and that gives them a good amount of independence. And now we're getting that help with viewing text and symbols on uneven planes, helping to track that up and down for a student who might have difficulty with that. The shape of the notes also matters. So we're used to shapes of our notes telling us how long they last. I don't know about you. I find that it's mostly on my memory that I understand that. There's nothing else really to indicate that would really be sensical, you know. So here I have block notation. This is where I start my adapted music students. And I would love for someone to chime in of what this orange block represents. What would it represent in staff notation, standard staff notation? I see an idea in the chat. Quarter notes, yeah. Each block is one beat. Now I've got the counting underneath, got the stop sign to indicate a rest. This is actually beforehand, I'd left the rest blank, and the our school, the high support needs students are in a program called the Access program. So that teacher said, use a stop sign. It's more direct with the students than just leaving it blank. So I started using the stop sign, and this was our rhythm notation for quite some time. And we were using it. We started on body percussion, auxiliary percussion, and then we moved to drumsticks and drum pads. And once I got to eighth notes with them, I just split the block in half. And this way it's very consistent. Consistency is key for some of our students' disabilities. There is less decoding and memorization going on here. It's literally how long the block looks is how long it lasts. So we're helping with difficulty with decoding symbols. You can help with difficulty with the foreground and background if you use colors that really stand out. Working memory, again, students don't have to remember, like, okay, is it filled in? Does it have a stem? How many beats does that get? Not so much with fine motor skill or tracking text up and down right now for just working with rhythm, because we don't really have to do that with just rhythm notation. However, if we combine those powers of color and shape, then we get something that we can, I'm going to actually put this link also in the chat for people to explore. So this is something I and also bring it up on my screen. Actually, will it show up on my screen if I go there? Let's find out. Can you all see the little color-coded piano on my screen? Okay, good. I couldn't remember if I shared my tab or my home window. So this is something I created virtually when we were doing hybrid learning, but I've kept it up just for the sake of example, because here's my color-coded keyboard, and you can explore with this too. The blocks are now color-coded to correlate with the color on the piano. I've kept the letters in them too, because if you have a student, I had my first year doing this, a student who is colorblind, or that certain colors confused. I had a student who they said he wasn't colorblind, but he was always getting C and G confused. And I think maybe it was because there were the yellows in each block. So adding the letters, now you have both supports, and that way a student can look for the colors or they can look for the letters. And they're also still getting the support of seeing how long the note lasts in a very consistent fashion. And then I can play my quarter notes, and when my G is twice as long, I'm going to hold it down. And that works really well. That was definitely my access point for working with those life skills students and getting them to play piano. And now some of them since then have faded into reading color-coded notation or regular notation. They're playing chords, they're playing sharps and flats, they're going in 2 octaves. And it was all about just finding that access point for me. I am truly amazed at the progress they have made, some of them even in just a few short months. And this is something you can do on string instruments too. Obviously, it's a little bit harder to do on a woodwind instrument or brass instrument. I use these color strips of vinyl on my guitars. I don't put them on every guitar, but I put them on about a third of the guitars, and that way students can use them if they would like to. I find that the vinyl doesn't leave a mess on the guitar, which is nice. It goes on pretty easily. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with tablature for guitars. Every line represents a string and it's usually numbers, but I can color code those numbers too, to make it more concrete. You could even take away the numbers and do your block notation on the tab. This could work on ukulele, violin, cello, any string instrument if a student was struggling with staff. And the nice thing about these blocks is that they do have a lot of connectivity and relevance with other types of music literacy that some students might be used to, depending on what type of music and music making experiences they're interested in. So here's a screenshot from a program called Soundtrap. And just like a lot of things, GarageBand is another one, BandLab. You'll have a MIDI piano roll, right? And again, we can see their blocks. Their blocks, depending on how long they last, that's the duration of the note. And they move up and down to indicate pitch. So here I have a direct connection with that culturally relevant aspect of music making for some of my students, depending on where they want to go with it. I want to stress that. If you have a student that wants to learn staff notation and needs to learn staff notation, then it's our job to eventually get them there. Figure Notes is another program that's very similar. They have all sorts of adapted notation. You'll see that this one's color coded, but they also have a part of the visual indicating fingering for the trumpet. They have a whole program, a ton of research went into it. You can purchase their curriculums and their materials. I like to borrow their ideas. If you want to explore, I'll put this link in the chat too. It's in the slides on slide 21. If you'd like to explore what they do for piano, and I'll open that right now. I know we're getting short on time here. We'll see that they're using color and shape. But they're using shape in a couple different ways, right? There are only so many songs, and I found this to be true after a while myself when working with my adapted music students. Only so many things I could play within one octave. So they're extending the note to show duration, but you'll notice that they have X's, squares, circles, triangles. What is that indicating? Yeah, octave, precisely. So I saw this idea for figure notes. I used it myself. It worked like a charm. And that was my way of getting my students to go beyond an octave and explore more things. Yes, definitely. In fact, I linked this in the chat and I will do it again because I see our time is ending. So when it comes to notation, size, shape, color, and direction are the big ones. I'm going to actually skip this little example. What I want to tell everyone is that you can make your own notation a few different ways. As teachers, we don't have a lot of extra time. I don't know if you noticed, we're all pretty busy. So making these things by hand is how I started, and that is a total time suck. And the worst part about it is it's not consistent. It can get messy. And once you use it, then you have to make another one by hand. So what I have linked in the rest of these slides for all of you to go back to are some other tools that you could use to create your own materials. I do use Google Slides for my color block notation. So I have some Google Slides and Google Draw things that you can make copies of and manipulate for your own use. I also have some tutorials in here for Noteflight and MuseScore. I'm fond of those because you can use them for free. I use MuseScore a lot because I can color code to my heart's desire. And if you don't have MuseScore, you can download it for free. You can make a NoteFlight account for free too. Some of you probably already know that. Um, I don't think you can color code in NoteFlight for free, is my experience. But what I want everyone to know is that if you go through these slides, I've linked so you don't have to scroll through. If you know you want to check out MuseScore, this link will go straight to the MuseScore tutorials on how to change some things in there. And I've purposely put slides through. So if you're in the section on MuseScore, because I was using MuseScore 3 for a long time, and now there's MuseScore 4. So what I've tried to do is give you, for string like guitar and for staff notation, and for the things that are different in each version, I'm giving you a slide for both. So how to change color in MuseScore 3 and how to change color in MuseScore 4 and so on. Yes, correct. Sibelius, yeah. So you can do color coding like Finale too. You can do color coding, but it's going to be set by pitch. So when I color code for string like guitar, I actually color code by finger placement, by fret. Um, Both work. People have their different preferences. I like keeping it consistent. For every fret, its specific color. I just find it gets too busy otherwise, and it works nicely for guitar tab if I really want to connect it to some culturally relevant materials, because as a guitar teacher, I teach them staff and tab, but I do find that tab is much more accessible for the music my students want to learn. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I also just want to add that if you go back to this material at any point and something's not making sense, you know what, as I say this, I just want to double check. I will be sure to add on the last slide, or maybe the first slide would make more sense, my email address. So you could always reach out to me if something's not working out for you. We could email back and forth, or maybe we can find a time to Zoom. I'd be happy to do that too.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah.
And I will just say I have the pleasure of working with Sarah almost every day through our programs at Longy, and she really is authentic when she says reach out to her. She is incredible about being accessible and sharing resources, and I really appreciate all that she does in that way. So I know that almost all of us are camera off, but we'll just trust that everybody's giving a big round of applause for Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing all those resources. And I think, sharing that selflessly as well is really important. I am going to just share a couple of things, and then we'll have some time for questions if anybody has them. If you have any questions about tonight, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Erin Zaffini is our Director of Teacher Education. I've already introduced myself. Michael Gutierrez, our administrative manager, and Sarah Fard, and her email is up on the screen here for everybody to see. If you're interested in more programs at Longy, we have coming up, our next Changemakers is Alice Soy and Eric Williamson talking about endeavors for culture responsive and sustaining education on December 6th. And we also have a couple of links here on this next page. I know the moment you've all been waiting for, that professional development certificate in the bottom left. So you can use those links to register for another Changemaker session, check out some of our teacher education programs at Longy, request your certificate for professional development, or follow us on Instagram if you're interested in that. And I will also throw all of those links into the chat here in a moment. And does anybody have any questions? I seem to have lost the Zoom screen. There we are. Does anybody have any questions for Sarah as we kind of wrap up the evening? You can either put it in the chat or unmute if you want to. This is an excellent example of wait time. I never get tired of that joke. All right, well, if we don't have any questions right now, that's a-okay. As Sarah said, she is
I see
very
some.
happy to. Oh, great. I teach high school chorus. I currently have a child who's mainstreamed from their self-contained class to chorus.
You know what? Just want to make sure I know you put in the chat how to say your name, and now I'm scrolling up. Sharan. Um, is this child okay? Sorry, I didn't realize we weren't done. I'm not sure if you're still typing, but okay, you are. Sorry. I keep doing that to you. And actually, it's okay, second, third grade level. I'm wondering, does the student vocalize? Does the student have a lot of control over their vocalization? Okay. So I imagine the hard part is just conveying what the student is supposed to sing. Sounds like you're doing a lot of accommodating already. I not fully knowing the entire situation. Oh, interesting. I mean, I also want to stress that though we were talking about the visual aspect of learning with music literacy, um, I'm also all for like multimodal instruction. Some of our kids are going to learn by rote, some of them are going to learn by visual, some of them are going to learn by both. If your student's learning by rote pretty well, um, and the visual is not very meaningful to that student, that might, and it sounds like you're modifying already. I wonder if modifying to just one aspect of the visual. Um, okay. Take it and try to take it at a slower pace, or something left out. So is it that the student sings by rote well, but then can't keep up with the ensemble? Is that an issue? Given that wait time, because I keep
Yeah.
jumping ahead of her text.
Well, I was just gonna ask her while
Yeah.
we're waiting for a moment. When you were talking about giving like one aspect of the written response, you're talking about maybe just giving them a visual of what the rhythm is, or giving them a color
Yeah,
coded what the.
I wonder if either that or if it's the words, like pick one aspect of what where the disconnect might be. I don't know exactly where that might be for the student, and perhaps just a visual that simplifies what the student's looking at. If they're getting the melody by rote, if they're getting some aspect of it by rote, it might just be there as a support for that student. And I would agree, it sounds like modifying is probably the way to go. If you feel like you have to take everything at a slower pace for that student, then giving her, am I assuming this is her? I assume this child's gender, I'm so sorry. This student, oh, it does say her, I'm sorry. Late night brain. Gosh, what was I just saying? Oh, good golly. Oh, that's right. So modifying her part, um, so that when you take the rest of the class to the tempo that you would usually rehearse it at, she has less to process as you're going through it. The only difficulty with that is that if she's the only one singing that, it could be a little confusing for her. So it might be helpful to have like a buddy, somebody who can sing that modified part with her. And I'm not sure what the structure of your classroom is or maybe she's strong enough by rope that that doesn't matter. I don't know. But if you have peer helpers work with her, it might be really great to have other peers singing a modified part. You know, maybe it's one note per measure or whatnot, so that she has less to process while she's working with the group. Yeah, that's my best thought without knowing and seeing the whole dynamic. I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah.
I definitely want to encourage you to reach out to Sarah directly because as you've all just seen, she is incredibly willing to brainstorm and think critically about how to help students, which has been my experience with her over the past 18 months that I've known her. So we do have to stop here for tonight. But I want to thank you one more time. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Sarah Fard, for presenting this information to us. And I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us on a Wednesday evening.
Good night, everybody.